The Russian house of Fabergé is one of the most famous and romanticized and fictionalized jewelry brands of all time. Even though the original workshop hasn't been open for over 100 years, it hasn't stopped this amazing brand from being mentioned in endless TV shows, books, and movies, from James Bond to The Simpsons and beyond. There is so much intrigue that surrounds their exceptional pieces, which of course includes those very famous Imperial Easter eggs. And I think their ties to the mysterious Romanovs and other very famous people around the world, including many royal families, just compounds the allure of Fabergé. One Easter egg in particular has hit headlines very recently because Christie's in New York is going to offer the Winter Egg up for auction this coming December. Like many of the Fabergé Easter eggs, it's estimated to set an auction record. Currently, it's estimated to go for around $20 million. This, of course, is if the egg even makes it to auction. A lot of these pieces are so rare and highly sought after. Only half a dozen eggs are still in private collections to this day, so it is very common for these pieces to be sold in a private sale before the auction even happens and the public even has access to it. What I love about the Winter Egg, and what a lot of people don't realize, is that it is very, very special because it is only one of 2 Imperial Easter eggs that were designed by a woman that worked in Fabergé's workshop, Alma Pihl. And she was only 20 when she started working in the workshop and only 24 when she started designing the Winter Egg. This makes this piece extra special and unique, and I'm going to tell you all about the Winter Egg at the end of this video. To start at the very beginning, Peter Carl Fabergé was born in 1846 to a French father. His name was Gustave, and Fabergé was not actually their original family name. His family actually came from France, and they were Huguenots, French Protestants, so they had eventually settled in St. Petersburg, and the name had changed many times, and Gustave is believed to be the one who changed it to Fabergé and even added the accent at the end. Gustave himself was a goldsmith and a jeweler, and he was pretty successful once he settled in St. Petersburg. He was known for making pretty basic and straightforward jewelry pieces, but luckily he recognized the talent in his son very quickly, and he sent him at a young age to go apprentice in Frankfurt and kind of on a grand tour of Europe. So he was going to a lot of museums and galleries and really studying historical pieces and jewelry and fine objects. And you really see this when it comes into his creativity and inspiration later in life. Carl also got a lot of experience and exposure to fine pieces because he actually worked in the Hermitage Museum early on, so he was able to really see these pieces up close and personal. Eventually, Carl took over the entire Fabergé business. This happened in 1872, and he was only 26 years old. The one thing that we know about Fabergé is that, of course, its main ties to the Imperial Russian family, also known as the Romanovs, and this is one of the big reasons it became so famous, because there's so much allure and mystery that surround the Romanovs. However, Fabergé himself has to be credited for many things. Of course, he was known for having extreme talent, artistry, craftsmanship. He really promoted this, but a lot of people don't realize he also had amazing business acumen, and he was really well known for this, and it's one of the things that also made Fabergé so successful as a brand and as a business. One of the ways he showed this business sense was how he set up the structure of the Fabergé company, and he did this by having a very unique system of not only designing the objects that were made by Fabergé, but how he put them into production. He was also known for recruiting top talent from across Europe in very specific specialties, and he was also known for promoting a very great camaraderie among the staff and a very family type of atmosphere. In one way, this was quite literal because Fabergé set up this network of workshops, and each workshop was responsible for a very specific specialty skill. So this could have been silver utensils or enamel or hardstone carving, fine jewelry. They were often family run themselves, because of course at that time these very specific skill sets were being passed within the family from generation to generation. Carl's brother Agathon also worked with him very closely, and it's this very tight-knit of workshops and designers that are so famous within Fabergé, many of them working very closely with him for decades, again within this kind of family atmosphere. And it's very, very unique, and it's a great way for Fabergé collectors and enthusiasts to be very familiar with very specific designers, and many of them even sign their initials along with the Fabergé stamps on their pieces. And it's a great way for auction houses, for example, to sometimes be able to authenticate the pieces even more. Another very unique point of difference within the Fabergé brand is that they didn't use the highest quality or highest value materials, let's say. They weren't targeting the most expensive things that they could get. And as an example, at their height of popularity at the turn of the century, around 1900, they had already been working as the official court jeweler for the Imperial Russian family for many years, since 1885. So really they had access to pretty much anything they wanted. Another important thing to remember is that working out of Russia, they were very close to the Ural Mountains, and I've mentioned this area a few times in the videos. It's an area that is known for being extremely rich in amazing gemstones because of the geological makeup of the area. Diamonds, emerald, amethyst, dematite garnet, all kinds of beautiful gems. And of course, some of these things we do see them, especially in the Imperial Easter eggs. But overall, Fabergé was very known for working with materials that were a little bit more modest. So the fact that these objects that the Fabergé workshop were making were really standing out for their artistry and their craftsmanship, their attention to detail, versus the wealth and the kind of high value of the stones or materials they were using, really also helped to set Fabergé apart from other jewelers at that time. Some of the gem materials they were using did come from the Ural Mountains. Some of these included nephrite, jasper, rock crystal quartz, malachite. Rock crystal quartz in particular was a favorite because it was always used to portray ice and water in some of their flower studies and was very lifelike. The pinkish red stone rhodonite was also very popular, especially in Russia because of its color, and in 1913 it was even named the national stone of Russia. The other method in fabrication that Fabergé is particularly famous for is Guilloché Enamel. Guilloché is traditionally a French method, but Fabergé really made it his own, and the workshop really put a lot of research and development into how they went about this. Enameling can sometimes be looked down upon because it's essentially just melted glass. It's not necessarily gem material, but I would say from the perspective of the Fabergé workshop, this is a very, very specialized process that they went about doing. At its core, it involves very intricately engraving patterns into various metal alloys. Guilloché, it's usually a very, very fine set of parallel lines, and they can either be straight or sometimes they were in a starburst pattern or a wavy pattern. And then various combinations of enamels, which were melted glass, colored glass, were layered on top in sometimes several very thin layers. And we can see many perfect examples of this on the various Imperial Easter eggs. By far the most famous creation of Fabergé, and perhaps why he became so famous in the first place, were for the Imperial Easter eggs, 50 of them, that they created for the Romanov family between 1885 and 1916. The first egg was created in 1885, and it was commissioned by Tsar Alexander III by Fabergé as an Easter present for his wife, Maria Fyodorovna. Minnie was so thrilled with the gift, and of course the ongoing commissions and all the objects that Fabergé continued to make for the family, that the Easter eggs became a tradition within the family, so much so that even after the first Tsar Alexander passed away, his son Nicholas II, who became the Tsar along with his wife Empress Alexandra, they continued the tradition, with Nicholas commissioning Fabergé to make 2 eggs per year, one for his wife and mother. It's important to note that giving very intricately designed and colored Easter eggs was actually very commonplace already in Russia. It had been happening for hundreds of years, and it's a very old tradition within Orthodox religions within Russia. So the gift of the Easter eggs wasn't that far-fetched. Of course, these were the most elaborate and luxurious pieces for the Imperial Russian family, but it was something that was already very commonplace within the country. The other thing to understand is how the Imperial Russian family was so tightly knit and linked to the British royals, and this connection also really helped the success of the brand of Fabergé. Empress Maria Fyodorovna was actually the sister of Queen Alexandra, who was the wife of the King of England at the time, Edward VII. And then, of course, once Alexander, the first Tsar, passed away and Nicholas II married Empress Alexandra, these were the niece and nephew of the King of England, and they were very, very close as a family. And the future King of England, George V, was considered the cousin of Nicholas II. Since the family was so close, they were constantly in correspondence, and with Fabergé being the imperial court jeweler, the Russians were constantly giving gifts by Fabergé to the British royal family. They were always sending things over, and of course they were extremely well received because they were so intricate and beautiful and creative creative and charming. So around 1900, as I mentioned previously, we really see the height of the brand of Fabergé. The British royal family is in love with it, and we are really getting some Russophilia happening in the UK. The Ballet Russe launched in London. Fabergé is known as kind of a royal item that is being very well received. Fabergé had expanded to 3 workshops in Russia and even went about opening a London workshop just to service all his Western European customers that were becoming so important. The Fabergé workshop in St. Petersburg was actually not far from the Winter Palace itself, and it was really becoming a social hotspot. There are a lot of letters that have been written by nobility at the time talking about how just being seen there is kind of an important thing to do, and really people are going there to kind of socialize and see their friends. And you have to remember, it's really being considered a type of gift store. It really wasn't a place that most people were going to get things for themselves, like jewelry, for example. That was really reserved for the Romanovs and the Russian imperial family. Instead, you were going there to pick out things that you were going to send to people who you really wanted to impress and kind of show off your good tastes and access to the Fabergé brand. And the types of things that people were finding there were things like desk sets and picture frames, cigarette cases, little kind of charming objects and things that you would use in your everyday life. Around the same time, Fabergé went to Paris to exhibit some of his pieces at the famous Universal exhibit. Of course, his collection was very well received, and it just really continued to solidify the name Fabergé in Western Europe and really grew the client base of the Fabergé brand, which is why they did decide to open a whole workshop in London in 1903. Unfortunately, this only lasted till 1915 when the shop was forced to close because of the breakout of World War I, and this is really when we start to see the demise of the Fabergé brand. At the same time, we have the Russian Revolution and the takeover of the Russian government by the Bolsheviks. With all of this political strife happening in the country, we also had the abdication of Tsar Nicholas II in 1917, and of course, the tragic murder of the entire Imperial Russian family in 1918. So all of the Fabergé workshops are eventually forced into closing. With this, the entire Fabergé family eventually had to flee from Russia. Many of them had to leave individually. 2 of his sons ended up in Paris, and Carl and his wife eventually were reunited together close to Lausanne in Switzerland, and very sadly, Carl Fabergé ended up getting liver cancer, and he passed away in that same location in 1920. 2 of the couple's sons that had fled to Paris, Eugene and Alexander, they actually started a different name under Fabergé, Fabergé and C, and their workshop was in Paris, and they created some jewelry pieces. They had very little resources, so it was, some modest jewelry and objects that they were able to produce, but they mostly were focused on repairs for very important clients that were hoping to keep their Fabergé pieces from the original workshop in good order. Another one of Carl's sons, Agathon Fabergé, who was of course named after his brother, he actually stayed in Russia, and he was contracted by the Imperial State Treasury for the government to appraise all of the Fabergé pieces that had been taken away from the imperial family and the Fabergé workshops. Very tragically, because no one would really know how important Fabergé culturally and historically would become, these objects were really only evaluated on a materials basis. And as I mentioned earlier, the value of the materials wasn't the most important thing when it came to Fabergé. It was all about the artistry and the craftsmanship. So a lot of the objects were evaluated with very low price tags, and most of the jewelry that was taken was actually broken up for gemstones and sold off, which is why we see so little authentic Fabergé jewelry still on the market today. Luckily, the Treasury did have the foresight to place a lot of the pieces that were owned by the Imperial Russian family into museums, and you can still find a lot of them in those collections. The Bolshevik army had also sold off many of the Imperial Easter eggs and other important pieces in order to fund their army, and a lot of them found themselves in Western Europe and attracted some very intelligent early enthusiasts and buyers. As an example, in 1934, Christie's London held an auction of 87 various Fabergé pieces, and the Winter Egg actually sold for £87. Of course, over the years, there have been many famous people that have been Fabergé enthusiasts and collectors, and they have sold some of their collections at auction and purchased a lot of pieces, some of which include Malcolm Forbes, Armand Hammer, and even the Sinatras. Now, auction houses are a very important source in the secondary market for authentic Fabergé pieces because it's very important to know that the brand and the name Fabergé went on a pretty wild ride after the official workshops closed. This can make buying authentic Fabergé pieces very confusing, even for enthusiasts and very avid collectors, because there are also just so many forgeries on the market. In 1937, a Russian-American entrepreneur named Sam Rubin decided to start a perfume company, and curiously, at the suggestion of his good friend Malcolm Forbes, who himself was actually an avid authentic Fabergé collector, he actually suggested to Rubin that he name the company Fabergé. Of course, he didn't actually have the permission of the Fabergé family, and so he ended up settling out of court with the family for only $25,000 with the permission to use the name for his products. This, of course, is quite tragic and unfortunate because it allowed the name to be licensed for decades afterward for products that really were not associated, of course, with Fabergé at all, and not only that, were just not of the craftsmanship and quality that the Fabergé name really represented throughout history. In 1964, another cosmetics brand actually purchased the name from Rubin, and they developed a lot of various products, some hair care products and cosmetics and perfume. They even had a lot of famous faces that represented the brand, including Roger Moore, who of course was, playing James Bond, Farrah Fawcett, and even Cary Grant. Then in 1989, conglomerate Unilever purchased the brand, and they allowed the Fabergé license to be used for jewelry items and even special objects that were inspired by the original Easter eggs. So this explains that if you are looking, somewhere in the secondary market, it could be eBay or other resellers, fashion resellers online, you do see a lot of items that are labeled as Fabergé, but of course something seems a little bit, not quite right with them, and this is because they probably belong to this era of heavy licensing of the brand. Of course, there's nothing wrong with owning these objects. They can be kind of fun, and they're certainly a part of the history of the brand, but it is important to know how and why they exist, and you want to pay the appropriate price, knowing that they aren't, a representation of the original workshop and the craftsmanship that that brand represents. So this is why, if you are interested in owning an original Fabergé piece, which is of course extremely rare and special, you definitely only want to shop with auction houses and other very, very trusted dealers that are aware of the history and all the ins and outs of the Fabergé brand in order to be able to avoid forgeries and other misrepresentations in these licensed products. Having said that, in 2007, a private equity firm purchased back all of the licensing deals associated with the name Fabergé and reunited it in a way with the original Fabergé family. They brought on a special advisory council, which included Theodora and Tatiana Fabergé, the granddaughter and great-granddaughter of Carl Fabergé, with the true hope of restoring the brand, restoring the craftsmanship and everything associated with Fabergé, and being able to produce collections that would still have that original inspiration in mind. This brings me to the very special Winter Egg. The Winter Egg is one of 42 Imperial Easter eggs that are considered to have survived the Russian Revolution. 8 are still considered either missing or assumed destroyed. Even though the Winter Egg has come up for auction a handful of times and been sold, I do think that this is one of the most special Imperial Easter eggs. As I mentioned, a lot of people don't realize it was actually designed and created by a young woman, Alma Pihl. August's sister Alina was actually also a designer for Fabergé, and these two women are pretty much the only female designers that are well known within these workshops. So this is extremely special, and Alma was actually only 20 when she started apprenticing in the workshop, and she got her start by being asked to design 40 winter-themed brooches for a very important client of Fabergé, Dr. Nobel, who was an oil magnate. So she designed these pieces, and everyone was so happy with them, including Carl Fabergé himself, that he actually asked her to design the Imperial Easter Egg that was being given to Maria Feodorovna that year by her son Nicholas, which had a very similar theme. So we can see here that the Winter Egg has been created from rock crystal quartz, a material I mentioned earlier that Fabergé really loved. Of course, it is used perfectly here to portray ice, and the whole theme of the egg is the very extreme and harsh Russian winter, eventually melting away into spring. And of course, this is one of the pivotal things that are being celebrated by the holiday of Easter. The egg itself has a beautiful moonstone cabochon on top, and it has all of these amazing little etchings and engravings to show frost, and they are being highlighted by very fine platinum and diamonds. And inside the egg is a surprise, which all of the Imperial Easter eggs have, and of course it's a beautiful little basket of wood anemones, and the flowers are created from white quartz. They have little green dimatoid garnets, very well known in Russian culture, this gemstone, and of course little diamonds as well, and they sit in a basket of platinum. As you can see, it is not hard to see why Minnie absolutely fell in love with this egg, as did her daughter-in-law, Empress Alexandra, so much so that Alma was asked to create the next Imperial Easter egg the following year as well for Empress Alexandra herself. Now, it's not hard to see that this mosaic egg is an absolute masterpiece, and it was very much inspired by Alma's mother-in-law because she had patchwork craft that she would work on every night in the home. And when Alma saw this, she was of course really inspired to create this kind of crosshatch inspired design for the Easter egg. The metalwork involved with this piece is absolutely incredible. It is a complete masterpiece, and it has actually been created by a series of teeny tiny platinum squares, pieces of metal that have been designed and shaped in order to create not only the outline of the egg, but to hold each of these teeny tiny gemstones in place so snugly in order to create this illusion of the crosshatch pattern. It required a lot of trial and error in order to create this perfect methodology in order for this egg to come to fruition. And a lot of other jewelry pieces, Alma actually created a little brooch with a similar patchwork pattern, were created in order to kind of finalize and perfect the method. It's really a triumph, and it's actually one of 3 Imperial Easter eggs that was owned by Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. Thank you so much for watching. Feel free to put any questions in the comments below, and be sure to check us out at winstongemsandjewelry.com.